Hello, hello, hello. My Wi-Fi signal is a little weak, so I'm going to switch my Wi-Fi real quick. Don't know if this is going to work. Here. Am I live? Yes, I'm live. All right, good. Sorry about that. Moved rooms. I moved into my son's room because it's quieter, and he's downstairs. So I'm going to use this. All right, before we get started, I know that we have spring break. This is the last time we're meeting for a week now, which is pretty cool. Kind of cool, right? Kind of weird this year. We usually look really, really forward to this week off, and now we're not really looking too forward to it. It's kind of just more of the same, hopefully. Um, Superintendent Leone wanted all the teachers to address, and I'm sure you've heard it if you've had another class today, just the importance of staying safe, especially over spring break when you don't have work from school to keep you busy. Um, the social distancing is very, very important. This is a crazy thing. This hasn't happened ever in my life and may hopefully never happen again. Um, but we have to continue to be safe. We have to continue to stay inside, stay away from the people, which is really weird, right? To say social distance. If for some reason you have to go to a food shopping place or something with your mom or your dad or by yourself to get something, always protecting yourself, face covered gloves, however you can, a scarf, whatever, even if you wear winter gloves because you don't have rubber gloves, like just something, right? Um, we got to be careful. I think, unfortunately, everybody probably knows or has heard of or, is knows a friend or a friend of a friend that's been affected by this. I know that one of my ex students who graduated just a couple of years ago, his mom just passed away from this, which is completely horrible. I talked to some ex students. One of my ex students, he's about it's 10, 12 years ago. He's about 27 years old. Him and his fiance are both suffering from this, and they're suffering pretty bad. I mean, I talk to him every day, and he's having a lot of problems. So it's dangerous. This is dangerous. There's no way to cut it any other way. So you need to stay safe. You need to stay inside. You need to stay away from other people. Sometimes it's really hard. Sometimes people have jobs. Sometimes maybe someone in your house has a job and they're coming home, right? Just be, be smart about it. If somebody has to go out, which is understandable, and they come back, you don't want to jump and give somebody a hug the second they walk in the door. You want to be responsible. You want to make sure that they are washing their hands and to maybe taking off clothes that they had at their job or something. This is very, very contagious. So it's a very, very dangerous time. So continue, and Superintendent Leon wanted everyone, wanted all the teachers to address this with all the students. So even though we have that week off and it might get tempting and you might get extra bored or whatever, you need to stay inside. You need to social distance. You can't go to the park and hang out with people and you just can't do it, and hopefully by the next time we meet, there's good news that this is ending and there's an end in sight and all that other stuff. So just want to be safe. All right, we are moving to the slides. All right, so now I gave you the slides about 15 minutes ago. You should have opened them up, looked through them, gotten ready for me, as you already know, this is the way it goes, to go through slide by slide. Today we are talking about how deforestation and irrigation impact agriculture. All right, so we are moving past slide one because that's a title slide. Slide two, of course, is the agenda, which you can look at your leisure. Slide three is a typical review slide you may look at your leisure. And we are moving to slide four, which is our objective. Our objective today is to identify the impacts of deforestation and irrigation on sustainable agriculture. That means agriculture that you're able to sustain over a long period of time, right? Successfully. So moving to slide five. Slide five is, I'm going to open it up on full screen so I can see it because it's small. Takes a second. It's always a little lag there. So slide five, open up, open up. Come on, slide five. All right. So slide five says, how does deforestation and irrigation impact agriculture, right? When we look at this slide, we see layers of the dirt. We see the top layers of the dirt. And you need to sort of understand how the dirt is made up so you understand how we can grow things in it, right? So the very, very, very top where you see grass, right? When you look outside on your grass, especially now, You may see some remnant dead leaves that were sitting on the grass, right? All that dead leaves, all that dead organic matter, that partially decomposed organic matter is called surface litter. So think about litter like when you throw cups on the ground and stuff, right? Well, if it's organic and natural, like if it's leaves or grass or something like that that's spread across the surface, that's called surface litter, okay? Then right under the surface litter, we have the topsoil. The topsoil is the most important layer of dirt. It is where seeds and roots take place or begin. It is where plants and crops get all their nutrients so they can grow, right? It is the spot where water is held to give the plants water as well. So topsoil is the most important layer of dirt. Underneath the topsoil, you have this thickening, this anything that was in the topsoil is sort of settled and gets a little more dense. That's called the zone of leaching. Anything that moves from the topsoil down forms sort of like a little bit of a denser layer. Um, Underneath the zone of leaching, you have the subsoil. The subsoil is, again, larger rock particles. There's still some organic matter in it. And there's also inorganic compounds. Inorganic compounds meaning things like gold or silver, stuff like that, right? So you can think of that as where you dig for gold, right? So as you see, as we move down underneath the subsoil, you have rock particles and bedrock, right? The rock particles are just bigger areas of solid rock. And then the bedrock underneath that is a solid layer of rock, right? So if you just look at the picture in general, you see towards the top, there's more dirt and less rocks. As you move down, there's less and less dirt and more rock until you get to a solid rock layer called bedrock. All right. So that's what we're looking at there. The most important part of this is the topsoil, and not all soil will have all of these layers in these amounts, right? Sometimes the bedrock will be a lot deeper in one place than it is in the other. Sometimes the bedrock will be closer to the surface, right? Sometimes the subsoil won't be as thick or as dense. And a lot of the times, the topsoil is the one that's most affected because the topsoil is on the top. So when you start thinking about that, you start thinking about, okay, wind and weather and erosion and water, right? The topsoil is very fragile. What you see at the top of the slide there, it says, contrary to what you might see or believe, soil is very much alive, right? Now, that's sort of just a form of expression because we know that real dirt, the dirt part of that is abiotic, right? The dirt is not a living thing. But they say the soil is very much alive because there are so many living organisms in it, right? And that's the left side. If you look at the left side, and this is all in the topsoil because the topsoil, again, is where all the crops and plants grow for the most part. You have ants and earthworms. Ants and earthworms are very important to the topsoil because they break it up, they aerate it, right? So they make pockets with their homes and with their channels that they make, as you can see on the picture. They aerate it, they make it less dense, they make it sort of fluffier, right? And that's very important because when seeds germinate and when roots grow, the roots need to be able to move through the soil, right? So if you're ever planting something in a pot, and you put a seed in it, if you really pack that dirt down tight, that's not what you're supposed to do because then the roots can't move through easily. You want to keep that topsoil in the pot nice and sort of fluffy, right? So worms and ants are the major contributors to aerating the topsoil in nature, and they keep it nice and sort of fluffy so roots can grow through it, and so water can penetrate easily as well. All right. Then you have also in the topsoil, you have bacteria and fungi, right? Bacteria and fungi are responsible for breaking down, decomposing organic matter. So all the plants that die, the grasses that die, the animals that die and move into the soil, these bacteria and fungi will decompose, will break them down into their organic compounds, which is something that the soil needs. That makes a nutrient-rich soil. Okay. And then there's also in the topsoil these rhizobium bacteria. You heard of those when you did the nitrogen cycle. On the roots of some plants, there are these bacteria that will fix nitrogen fixing bacteria or plants, and they will take a form of nitrogen from the soil and they will make it bioavailable to the plants. They will fix it so it can be used. All right. So in the topsoil, tons of living things. Very important to keep this soil nutrient and fertile, right? Nutrient rich and fertile. It's very, very fragile without these animals. And you can look at all of these. You can look at all of these if you want to bring back a word from the past. Look at all of them as a keystone species. I mean, you get rid of the ants or the worms, and the ants and the worms, you don't have aerated soil. You're going to have a lot of problems trying to grow things, right? So all this stuff is necessary. All right, moving to slide, I think it's 6, right? I'm going to stay on full screen. So I can't see anything if you're writing anything right now. I'll look at it in a second. So when we look at slide 6, this is trying to get an idea of how many living organisms live in the soil. And it is unbelievable how many things live in the soil. So just for your own sake of scale, an acre, when you see an acre of land, like I live on 1 acre, I live on 2 acres. An acre is about 75% of an American football field. So if you ever watch football on TV or you see a football field somewhere in a stadium, think about 75% of that, right? And that's an acre. A hectare is approximately 1.5 soccer fields big. So imagine an area that was 1.5 soccer fields when we're talking through this, all right? The other unit you need to understand is a gram. A gram is about a tablespoon full of something. So if I took a tablespoon out of my drawer, then I took a spoon and I lifted up some dirt, the dirt on that spoon is about a gram. Okay, you need to understand that too. So now look at the number of organisms in average farm soil down the left-hand side of slide 6. Insects, right? So per hectare. So in an area that's the size of 1.5 soccer fields, you have approximately 23 million insects on average. That's insane. 1.5 soccer fields, 23 million insects. If you add the arthropods, which are things like beetles and stuff, if you add that with the insects, per 1.5 soccer field of an area, you have 725 million of these things in that small area. It's just in that one area. It's crazy. This is even crazier. If you take a gram of dirt, if you go outside with a spoon and dig a piece of dirt up on that spoon, you will have on average 2.5 billion bacteria in that one little drop of dirt, which is insane. You'll have 50,000 algae, different on average, 50,000 algae per gram. And if you look at that soccer field again, 1.5 soccer fields an area, there's approximately 6 million earthworms in that area. That is just amazing. When you're talking about millions and billions in that small area, and then think about how big the earth is and how much land there is on the earth, it is amazing how many insects and bacteria and earthworms and stuff there are. So all of those are very, very important to keep that process going. And you can see this soil food web on the right. I'll let you look through it because it just talks about the different trophic levels, which we've already gone through. But you can see the food web here. And it will, it shows you how much is needed for soil to become fertile and usable. Right? So it's a very important thing. Soil, very fragile. All right, moving into, I'm going to shrink the screen down again. Moving into slide number 7. It takes so long to shrink this screen down. Okay, moving to slide 7. It says soil takes a great deal of time to accumulate and establish itself. This doesn't happen overnight. You need a long process, a lot of time to make soil fertile and nutrient rich enough to grow food, crops, things, right? So it takes a great deal of time. It's not the easiest thing to do when you use up all the nutrients and you need to get nutrients back into the soil, right? That's where the whole fertilizer movement came in. That's when adding things to the soil. But we know that we don't really do that, right? And it bothers the water supply. So we're not really talking about that. We're talking about, naturally speaking, it takes a lot of time to establish fertile soil. And the one thing with that, and it says it on the slide too in smaller letters, it says we have to take a lot of care to ensure that erosion doesn't remove it. If erosion removes the topsoil, you're not going to get much growing there at all. So that's a problem. So you have to make sure that you're not in an area where you're not doing anything as a farmer or as a society to erode the fertile land and to get rid of that topsoil. Can't be doing that. It's very, very dangerous because soil, again, is very, very fragile. All right, moving to slide 8. Slide 8 says, recall from when we talked about biomes and ecosystems, right? Every biome, every ecosystem has a different climate. There's different temperature, right? Different amount of rainfall. There's all different things that are happening in different biomes. That is going to affect the soil. So every biome, every ecosystem is going to have different types of nutrients in their soil. They're going to have different amounts of nutrient rich soil. So depending on where you are, the soil is different everywhere. The soil will be different here than it is in Arizona. The soil will be different here than it is in South America, right? And this is why we grow certain things in certain areas, right? Like some things grow everywhere, but this is why we grow corn where we grow corn in America. This is why we grow tomatoes, excuse me, where we do. This is why they grow coffee where they do, right? Because there's the climate is there and the soil is there too. That's very important to understand. Now, there are a lot of places in the world where the soil is not, where the topsoil is either eroded or the soil is just not not nutrient rich enough to grow the things that need to be grown there. So I'm thinking more along the lines of, villages and places in the world, towns and villages that are sort of away from modern society. And the way they do it is if they don't have dirt to grow things and they need to grow things, they will use this thing called slash and burn agriculture. Slash and burn agriculture is when, and here's where deforestation comes into place, is when if you don't have any area with fertile soil to grow on, you cut down a forest, you cut down a big section of forest, right? And you cut it all down, you slash it, and after it's cut down, you burn it. And when you burn all of this forest material on this land, it all turns to ash and it forms a really thick layer of ash. That thick layer of ash is all organic material. It's nutrient rich. So you're actually making a layer of topsoil that you can grow things in that you couldn't grow in the dirt before. So by burning, slashing and burning all of this organic material, it forms a layer of ash and topsoil that you can grow in. Not the best idea. I mean, that's what people do because they don't have, they have to grow things where they don't have fertile soil. But the problem with that is after you burn it all down, right? And this is the last sort of hashtag on here, the last bullet point. When you burn it all down, you slash it and you burn it and all that stuff, and you make this nutrient rich soil, that nutrient rich soil is going to get used up. You're going to plant on it for however many, years or cycles, and the nutrients are going to get used up, and there's nowhere to get nutrients from anymore. You can't, nothing else. It's not like you can burn on top of it. You've already burnt down that area. So you can't reuse the land. So then that land becomes this whole thing called desertification, where the land is just barren and unable to be used. Right. That also happens when people don't rotate their crops properly either. We talked about crop rotation a couple days ago. Well, if you don't rotate them properly, or if you try to do it too fast and you use up all the nutrients, remember it takes a long time for soil to become nutrient rich. If you don't do it right, you end up with these huge plots of land on your farm that just are desertified. They're like a desert. They won't grow. It will just take way too long to be productive. All right. So that's what slide 8 sort of talks about. When we move towards slide 9, we see, okay, so up until now, we've talked about the layers of the soil. We talked about all the living things in the soil. We talked about how important time is to get it nutrient rich. We talked about erosion and the dangers of eroding that topsoil away, right? And we talked about this other approach where they slash and burn. So we talked about deforestation in order to get fertile soil, right? So we've talked about all those things, and there's one more variable that comes into play, and that's water. You need to keep the soil moist. If you don't have moisture in the soil, plants can't grow, right? So it doesn't matter how many nutrients are in there. If you don't have water to add to these plants, you're not going to get what you want. So that's where irrigation comes in. Now, some places, depending on what you're growing and where you're growing it, some places it rains enough and the soil stays moist enough where you don't have to worry about watering it yourself. The nature is going to do that, just the water cycle. But when you're in an area where you're trying to grow something that doesn't get enough water just by the natural water cycle, you have to irrigate, which means you have to bring water in from somewhere and water those crops yourself, right? So there's two main ways that people irrigate. It's all on this slide too. I'm just talking out of order, I guess. The two main ways that they irrigate is they will use groundwater or they'll use river water, right? So groundwater is when you dig deep. Think about a well. Somebody digs a well. They dig all the way down, put a pipe in, water comes up from the ground, from underneath the ground, and they use that, right? If you are in an area where you have groundwater under you and you can drill for it, then that's fine. Then you can do that and you can irrigate your crops that way. If not, hopefully you are by a water source like a river, and you can divert some of that water to your farm, and either by pipe, or you can cut a channel, a tributary, they call it, right, which would actually divert some of that water from the river down towards your land. So you can do it that way, right? So there's two ways that main ways that people irrigate their crops. Problem with that, as you can see here, is if you improperly irrigate, if you don't do it the right way, if you don't take the precautions, what can happen is saltification of the soil. That just means that the soil gets very salty. Now you're thinking, wait a second, no, he didn't say ocean, he said river and groundwater, right? What's he talking about salt? Well, yeah, obviously the ocean has tons of salt in it, and we can't use the ocean water for really anything unless we desalinate it, right? So we can't irrigate with ocean water. It would never work. Rain, right? River and groundwater have salt in it. It's just a very, very much smaller amount of salt in it, but there's salt content, like there's any kind of inorganic materials inside the water. There's definitely salt as well. Not salty like an ocean if you tasted it, but there is salt in there. So what happens is during the water cycle, this is why when it rains, it's the best option for irrigating crop or watering crops. When it rains, we know that the water evaporates from the rivers, right? It evaporates from the bodies of water. And as it evaporates, it's only the water particles that are evaporating into the atmosphere. Anything that's left in there, salt, for instance, stays in that water, right? So when it rains, there's no salt content in the rain, very, very minute. But there is a salt content that builds up in rivers and groundwater over time. And what happens if you're using that water for your dirt, you are spraying your crops, all that water is going in. When the water gets used up by the plants or evaporates from the dirt, you are left with salt. Now, it's not, it depends on what area you're doing it from and all this other stuff. But over time, the dirt will turn saltier. It will get saltier. Plants do not like salt. They do not grow in salt. It's not a good combination for growing healthy crops. So once you get too much salt in the soil, you can't use it anymore. All right. So what you get out of this, at least, is that things are very much things are very fragile. There's a balance, right? You need the right dirt, the right amount of topsoil. You need the right amount of organisms in there doing their jobs to make it fertile. You need to make sure there's no erosion going on that gets rid of the topsoil that's so fertile, right? You have to make sure that we're not cutting down trees to make areas where we can grow. You have to make sure that you're watering those crops properly, because the soil is so, I've said it 100 times, is so fragile that a little bit of extra salt content will screw up all your crops, right? A little less nutrients or a little less insects in the ground can screw up your whole crops. So if it's not aerating, if there's not a lot of earthworms, you're going to have problems. So there's a lot of variables that have to come together in a certain way to have this fertile land, right? It's very, very easy to manipulate, to shatter that by just removing one or two of those things. So if we move to slide 10, slide 10 is the guided practice. This is what you're doing. This is an activity called cost and benefits analysis. If you move to slide 11, it gives you information on how to do that. What you're doing is on slide 11, on the right-hand side, you will see different types of irrigation: flood irrigation, drip, condensed, sub-irrigation, lateral, move, center, pivot. You'll see all these different kinds of irrigation methods, all right? You're going to look them up. You're going to look at some. You're going to pick one. So you're going to find one that has a lot of information, or you're going to find one that looks cool to you, or whatever speaks to you in some way. And you are going to find a nice diagram or an illustration. You're going to start a new doc, and you're going to turn that doc into me. You're going to have an illustration or a diagram on how that type of irrigation works, right? So I know a little bit about these, but I don't know exacts about every one of them. So I would like to open up that document and see a diagram that really points out each and every step of your type of irrigation, all right? Once you find that diagram and you post that, I want you to make a cost benefits list, right? So underneath it, you can either write it out in sentences, or you can put it as a chart with costs and benefits. Now, when we say costs and benefits, it's kind of a fancy way of saying pros and cons, right? What are the costs? And I don't just mean financially. I mean, there may be a financial component to it. It may be very expensive to put into place. And of course, you would include that. But You are also talking about the cost to the environment, right? Is there an environmental con, right? Is it very laborious? Does it take a lot of people to do? Does it produce something? Like, does it produce a fossil fuel? Because now maybe you have to move things through the motor and you're burning something. And, there are some costs to these methods. And there are obviously also benefits, or they wouldn't be using them, right? So I want you to start a chart, bullet point a couple. I don't want one of each. I want a few of each. So find a few costs and a few benefits of that type of irrigation. And that's it, right? So you're going to have a nice diagram. You're going to have a cost benefits analysis chart, and you're going to turn it into me. Okay. I think that's it. So we won't see each other for a while, right? It's spring break, which is yippity yay, right? I want you to come back. Do not forget to come back. Don't make us go after you. You have to come back. We have to keep signing in. We have to keep doing work. Just to let you know about the cycle, I think the cycle was extended till the 23rd of April. I think that's the Thursday after we get back. So I think there's a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday before grades are due. So we'll see each other again before that. You want to keep an eye on your grades. You want to make sure that if you're doing something late, which is okay, if you're doing something late, you need to private message me and tell me, hey, it was late, but it's in now. Check it out. I don't know. I don't go back. I grade things once and I wait until someone tells me they did it. If you have a grade in there that doesn't match what you should be getting, let me know. You got to private message me. Okay. So you'll see in the grade book, there is a column that is blank right now. That is for the GMO writing that you started and should have done and turned in. So that GMO, 2 paragraphs or whatever about GMOs, for or against, should be in there. And then there will be one more column you'll see pop up, and that's this. That's the cost analysis benefits. All right. I don't know what I'm going to title it yet, but I'll probably just call it cost benefit, or soil cost benefit, something like we can all understand. So there'll be 2 more grades before the end of the cycle. All right, just letting you know. So you want to make sure that everything that we've done, the things in grade book specifically, the things that we've done, you have done and you've turned in. And if the grade doesn't say that they have, you have to private message me and let me know, hey, I did this, check it out. Also, you want to keep in mind that there will be 2 more grades. So if you're sitting at a good grade right now, you're like, yeah, I'm awesome. Still 2 grades to go in. So make sure you get your work done. All right. That is all I really, really have to say. I'm going to stick with YouTube. The reason why I'm going to stick with YouTube, I don't know if I've mentioned it to you guys yet, but I've been mentioning it. I'm not going to do sort of WebEx or Google Hangouts or anything, because when I do that, first of all, there's only a handful of you that watch this live. Like sometimes I'll get 4, sometimes I'll get 8, sometimes I'll get 10. There's not everybody watching live. So if we're on cameras, it's kind of weird just staring at each other, like 3 of us. It's kind of weird. Also, when I do this, it automatically posts it right to the classroom. So you can click on it at any time and watch it, right? I don't have to worry about trying to find a way to get it to you, because some don't even record some of the Google stuff, and WebEx does, but it's pain in the butt. This just is so seamless and easy. I'm still live. You can still comment in the comment section if you need to talk to me while we're doing things, which many people do. But if you can't get to me in the live session, that's okay. Like, there's usually only 5 or 6 people watching live, but by the time I go to the end of the day and check the views, there's 95% of the classes has checked it. There'll be 25, 28 views. So that's why I'm going to stick with YouTube. I think it works. Plus, I get to talk. You have to listen. There's nobody interrupting. And if you do have a question, you can write it in the comments section and all that stuff. But that's it. I'm out. I will talk to you guys soon. Enjoy your spring break. Please be safe. Please stay inside. Please, please, please. I'll be checking email once or twice throughout the week. So if anything's up, I'll figure it out. All right. Take care.